Guest. I am joined by the incomparable Alice Marie Johnson. Alice, you and I have not spoken directly, but I was with Stand Together and that network for a long time, and I've had the opportunity to hear you share your inspirational story. I wanted to give that opportunity to you for those who are listening to Super Talk as well. And just talk to me about sort of your journey from the point that you were arrested through what happened in prison, and then ultimately what President Trump saw in you to say, this is a prime example of a person who needs a second chance.
Good morning, Russ. It's great to be on Super Talk Radio this morning, Super Talk Mississippi, especially being a Mississippi born, bred, and raised woman myself. Um, Thank you for having me on. And thank you, listening audience, for allowing me to share my story and my experience. I grew up in Mississippi, moved to Memphis, Tennessee, had a very, very successful career. Had married my high school sweetheart. We had 5 children, but everything was very tumultuous. Our marriage was not a very good marriage. It was a teenage marriage. Um, anyway, after losing my job and my marriage ended, my life just really changed. I became involved with someone who was involved in things they shouldn't be involved in that I really did not even know about. After I lost my job, I was facing my life really had spiraled. I was facing bankruptcy. Didn't even know how I was going to pay my bills, Russ. And I was offered something that seemed so simple, but would end up taking my life away from me. And that was to be in prison, what we call a telephone mule. They called me and I'd pass a phone number. And when everything tumbled down and someone was arrested, because I had the telephone records, didn't know anything about the criminal justice system, because I'd never been in trouble before. This was my first run-in with the law, and they painted a picture of me as being their boss because I wouldn't take a plea. I didn't know that if you go to trial, then everyone would jump on your case. Even people who I didn't even know jumped on my case. But I want to back up just a little bit. During this whole process of my life just being crazy, my youngest son was tragically killed in a motor scooter accident. He was 12, his brother was 14, and he received severe head injuries, and I had to make the decision to disconnect him from life support. So my life really went crazy then, not even having money for funeral. So I found myself going deeper in and further down. And when the arrest came, I really didn't. I hired an attorney who told me, you don't have drugs, you don't have any money. I didn't even have $500 in the bank. And the people who testified against me, they took cars, houses from them. And they also allowed me to have a $10,000 bond. And the people who ended up testifying couldn't even get a bond. So I was out for 2 years working and had no idea, Russ, that a life sentence was possible for a low level offender like myself. But under the conspiracy laws, you are held responsible for everything that someone does in the conspiracy. So, because I've never dealt drugs or used drugs, I was convicted of attempted possession, never possessed anything, and didn't know that I could possibly get the sentence that was given to me, life plus 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole.
So
But
you were a nonviolent offender.
yes, a nonviolent offender, never been in trouble before, had no run ins with the legal system, my first ever conviction of anything.
So help me understand that. You had not personally sold drugs. You had
No,
not personally used drugs. You essentially
no,
were an intermediary between sellers. Is
yes.
that right?
And yes, and I didn't even know what drugs cost or what they look like. My role was to pass telephone numbers. If they called me, then I called someone and say, this is the number that you can reach this person at, without having met the person, and my job was done. I was done. and didn't even know how much drugs was being channeled at all. But that's a lesson, a very tough lesson that will cost me over 2 decades of my life away from my children. But Russ, I made a decision when I went to prison. My mother said something to me that really stuck with me. I may not say it verbatim, but in essence, she told me that I did not have, do not conform to your environment. You know who you are. Don't forget who you are. And character and a good name was always so important to my parents, who were very strong Christians. And when I went to prison, I asked the Lord, if you could use me here, use me, God. Show me what purpose there is for me here. And honestly, Russ, as I looked around at so many other women who were hopeless, I started seeing what I could do to contribute to my community. Because in prison, that is now your community. And one of the first things that I did was I changed an education system for women who had long sentences. I fought and I won. And I started writing plays and giving women hope that they were more than what people had said they were. And for the first time, many of them heard applause. I became really what you call a model prisoner. I started doing stuff not only for the women, but I became a liaison for them with staff. I could represent them when things were going wrong, and they could always depend upon me to help them de escalate and talk common sense or talk compassion into a situation. I started speaking at universities from prison, like Yale, New York University, University of Washington in Seattle, and YouTube and Google platforms. I was asked to do a video op ed that went viral that Kim Kardashian saw, and she started advocating for my release. She contacted Ivanka Trump first and then Jared, and eventually got an audience with the president. And she got that audience on my birthday, and the rest is history. 7 days later, the world watched as I ran across that road into freedom. But one thing that I did, Russ, I promised the ladies who I left behind that I would never stop fighting for them. And every time they see me or on a program or hear me, hope would spread like wildfire across the prisons. And so when I gained my release, um, I became a part of the Stand Together family also. I became an ambassador for them. And and that helped me on my own platform to really supersize the work that I was doing. I was able to do more, affect more policies, and to really to advocate for more people. And over the course of time, I was able to help so many women and men gain their freedom. And as a result, last year, I was honored at the Ebony Power 100, which is the 100 most influential Black Americans. And I was selected as a community builder because what I've done is bring communities back together.
So I want to back up and ask you about Kim Kardashian a little bit, right? Because she essentially became your chief advocate.
She did. And one thing that Kim told me, Russ, I know this might sound really funny, really weird, listeners, but I didn't even know who Kim Kardashian was. When I go to prison, she was a teenager. So I knew nothing about her fame, nothing about her, period. And so when I was contacted by her attorney, Sean Holly, that she had a very rich and famous client who wanted to help me get out of prison. And she said, do you want that? I said, let me think about it. Yes. And so when Kim, we talked on the phone, and my daughter, I really thought the person she was talking about was Chris Kardashian after I looked up her clients. So I didn't even know who she was, but Kim fought for me like a warrior. And that's why I call her not just my angel, but my war angel.
Kim Kardashian coming through big for Alice Marie Johnson. When we come back from the break, if Alice can stick around, we will do one more segment, talk about her interactions with President Trump and the clemency that ultimately was granted, and then talk a little bit about what cities can do and how we can respond to crime in places like Jackson. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibbert, Russ Latino guest hosting from the Element Wealth studio. Be back in just a moment. We're in the Element Wealth studio, and we are joined by Alice Marie Johnson, who's got an incredible story of someone who made a mistake, who probably got punished really disproportionately for that mistake, but has found a way in that adversity to change other people's lives and to change her own life and to find real redemption. And, you know, Alice, you were mentioning before the break that when you got arrested originally, you didn't really know that going to trial would carry the consequences that it carried. And I think a lot of citizens just generally don't understand that, right? Because they think about it in terms of this sort of, I'm just a bill, I have constitutional rights, and one of those rights is to go to a trial. But what they don't realize is very frequently when defendants refuse to take a plea deal, that the book more than gets thrown at them. And so were you offered a plea deal that you turned down?
Yes, I was offered a plea deal, Russ, of 3 years.
So you were
And
offered a plea.
as I,
Go ahead.
yes, and as I said, that plea deal turned into life plus 25 years after trial.
I just think that's something that a lot of people don't appreciate, is that very frequently when people exercise their right to a trial, if they are found guilty, the sentences are astronomical, and that becomes a tool to get people to take plea deals, even on bad cases sometimes. And so, you know, it sounds like what happened with you is you decided to go to trial after being offered a 3-year plea deal, and you were the recipient of one of those sort of draconian punishments. But it doesn't seem like you're suggesting that there was no culpability. It seems like you've accepted that there was something that happened in your life, you were in a period of turmoil, you made a mistake, and you decided you were going to find ways to redeem yourself and help other people. Am I reading that right?
You're reading it exactly right. I have never, ever said that I was innocent of doing anything wrong because I did do something that was wrong, but it certainly did not merit the sentence that I was given. You know, that's one of the things that I truly believe that we have too many low level offenders who are serving way, way too much time. And honestly, I'm not a person who is anti law, anti police, because I want to be safe too.
Tell me, when it got to the level that President Trump got involved, were you able to interact with him?
Oh, absolutely. After my release, I've interacted with President Trump on many, many levels. I've even been on Air Force One, Russ, with him. And I brought cases to his attention. He listened to me, and he set so many people free from my advocating directly to him for their freedom.
Right now, we are in a period of uncertainty around our justice system in America. So we obviously went through a series of police-involved tragedies. In the wake of the George Floyd incident, there was a defund the police movement, which I think most people recognize isn't a rational response. Like, we do need safe communities. We do need police presence. But there's also been this move where before there was some bipartisan support for real criminal justice reform, and it seems like because of what happened during COVID with some crime rates going up in specific cities, that now people are more resistant to the idea of good criminal justice reform. Talk to me a little bit about the work that you're doing and how you distinguish what is good criminal justice reform, common sense stuff, versus concerns over rising crime rates in cities.
Yeah, Russ, I truly believe that we have a pathway to what I call smart on crime solutions. I've been working with Gerard Smith with a public safety coalition that is called Public Safety Solutions for America. And that is what we have. We got science. It's based on proof, not emotions, of what smart on crime looks like. When right after I was released from prison, Russ, I worked so hard on trying to help get the First Step Act passed. And the First Step Act has been so big, and it was uh, really one of the most historic bipartisan uh, pieces of legislation that has been passed over the last 30 years. President Trump signed it into law. In fact, after looking at my case, he asked for sentencing reform. He said at his press conference that he never wants there to be another Alice Johnson, a case like mine where I received such a long sentence. So since that time, I believe around 22,000 people have been able to be released home who were very much ready to be reintegrated back into their communities. Uh, it, I want to just give you just a really quick figure of 11,000 people were released early under COVID. Only 17 people have reoffended because they are vetted so closely for safety risks. And I think we have an opportunity to move forward on more smart on crime solutions. Yeah, I believe that with our policing, you said we've heard that phrase, defund the police. And I think, that's a very bad phrase to use because I think most people don't want to really defund the police. What we need is to make sure that our police have the resources that they need to do their jobs and are not focusing on, the violent crimes. I mean, not focusing on the low level crime, but putting their focus more on reducing the violence in our communities. I believe that the violence, the uptick that we're having in so many violence in our cities is a direct result of police also not having the manpower, the tools, and their focus is not should not be focused on so much. I'd say on traffic tickets, even though I know you need to make sure that you have those, or low level offenders. Our jails are too full. Our prisons are too full of people that really don't deserve to be there, who've already served their time.
I think what you just said is an essential part of addressing the crime problem to the extent that there is one, a recognition that if you look at the FBI data, it really just is in cities that we've seen this uptick over the last 2 years. Outside of, as an example, Jackson in Mississippi, the state data shows that gets reported to the FBI shows that we really haven't seen an increase in violent crime or homicide that is being driven by concentrations of populations in places like Jackson or Tulsa and other places like that are very unique and targeted. The other thing is recognizing that we have limited resources. So if you have limited resources, you should focus on the people that represent the biggest threats. And, a cynic would look at it and say, there is money in pulling someone over for a traffic ticket. There's not money for a municipality in solving a murder. But what we want the police to do is, if they've got to make a choice, solve the murder. Don't pull the guy over for the traffic ticket, right?
Right. Right. And I think that, police, just being a police now, the bad things that have been said, we have some bad players who are police officers. But do we want to judge everyone by the acts of bad players? When I was in prison, I had on a uniform also. So I don't judge. I really, truly have learned not to judge by anything. I look at people as people, and police are people. We need to make sure that dignity is brought back to that job.
Alice, I've got just a few seconds left. If there's one thing you want the listening audience to know about what smart criminal justice reform looks like, what would that be?
That would be to not focus on the low level offenders, to focus on the violence that is taking place in our nation, and to really equip our police with the necessary resources that they need to do their job well.
We've been talking to Alice Marie Johnson. Her story is inspirational. She got put in a situation and made a mistake, which she owns, and ultimately served 21 years for that mistake before President Trump and Kim Kardashian, which is an odd mix, stepped in to help Alice out and grant clemency. And she is working hard to help other people and to also make sure that we're making smart reforms on criminal justice reform. Alice, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Russ, for having me today.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibbert, Russ Latino, guest hosting from the Element Wealth studio.